Hello everyone and welcome back to Series 6 of The Public Eye, a 6-part series of podcasts brought to you by Granite Exchange. I'm your host Sarah Travers, and throughout this series I have the great honour of speaking with local entrepreneurs and business owners to learn more about how their companies have come to be, to gain insight into their growth and find out how they continue to innovate. So, wherever you get your podcasts from, remember to keep an eye out for all new episodes and subscribe to stay up to date. Well, today I am very excited to be joined by Donal Farrell, a master distiller and blender at Mourne Dew Distillery. Donal, you're very welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you in the studio. But before we begin, I'm going to give everyone a little bit of background on Mourne Dew, though I'm sure you will put some meat on the bones for us in a few seconds' time. So Mourne Dew Distillery is the first legal distillery to operate in the Mournes for many centuries. They are the inheritor of a distilling tradition that has endured through the tumultuous history of this great island. From the high tables of clergy, with drinks replete with exotic concoctions of luxurious ingredients reminiscent of a modern-style gin, to the open hearth of the humblest cottier, where recipes for homemade poaching, using whatever ingredients their little farms could offer, were passed from father to son. And indeed, it is a father and son that runs this wonderful business now. But Father Donal is here to talk to us today. Donal, let's start from the beginning. You weren't always running a distillery.
That's right, Sarah. For many years I was a practicing chartered accountant, and for many more years I am a practicing barrister. So the move into the distillation business was rather left field, to put it mildly. It came about because many years ago now, I was involved in a court case, and the court case involved DNA evidence, which was using a method of extraction called cold distillation / vacuum distillation. One goes with the other. When you put liquid in a vacuum, it boils at very low temperatures, and I realised at that stage that had huge potential for cooking, because I'm an amateur cook, I suppose, and it also had potential for distillation. The eureka moment on the distillation didn't happen until some time later, when I was speaking to an old gentleman who now sings with the Choir Celestial. He passed on many years ago, but he was making poaching, and I started talking to him about this distillation technique that I had seen, and he was fascinated by it. But he thought, he was too old to pursue it, and it was too technical for him. And one thing led to another. I spoke to different people about it, and I decided, along with Donal and a friend of mine, Noel Mills, who has since retired from the business. Noel's a chemist, so he was able to input his technical knowledge. We decided to have a go at creating an unusual type of distillery whereby we combine conventional distillation and vacuum distillation. So over the years, we've built up a corpus of knowledge on vacuum distillation techniques and methodologies, and we've refined the still designs to the extent that we're now producing fairly unique products from fairly unique stills.
Wow. That is the most interesting explainer of why a business started, I think, that we've had on the Public Eye podcast. I don't even know where to go with that. I'm thinking, what happened to the DNA evidence in the court case in that particular...
Yeah, well, the DNA, as you probably know, is a very, very large, complex molecule.
Yeah.
And the importance of the vacuum distillation process is that it extracts the DNA without damaging it. So if you bring that over to food flavour molecules, and think of an orange molecule in a fruit, and you distill the orange juice and alcohol. If you distill it in a conventional still, you'll get marmalade flavours. If you distill it in a vacuum still with cold distillation, you'll get fresh orange flavoured alcohol. So if you apply that across a range of botanicals, you can see how the flavour profiles that we would get from different botanicals, let's say rose petals, would be completely different from conventional methods. So if you subject a rose petal to conventional distillation, you get something like a stewed tea bag flavour. But when you do it through a vacuum still, where we run at 2% of atmospheric pressure and condense at -40 centigrade, you get this really delicate, delightful rose-flavoured tincture, and that's what goes into our drinks.
Feeling so thirsty at the thought of all those gorgeous flavours that you've talked about, and that's just absolutely fascinating. And where does it date back to? I mean, obviously this is an ancient tradition and this vacuum form of distilling, but you know, who discovered it? Where did you find that it came from?
Yeah, well, vacuum distilling is a pretty recent phenomenon in terms of its use. It's used in forensic laboratories. So if you go to PSNI Forensic Laboratory, you'll see vacuum stills on desktops. Ours are slightly larger than that, in that they're industrial stills standing a couple of stories high. Maybe not a couple of stories high, but certainly the full of a warehouse. Distillation itself is a much older story than that. Distillation classically came from the Arabs. Even the word alcohol is an Arabic word, and that's the root of that word.
Goodness.
But before that, the Irish were doing something similar to distillation. There is a book held in the Diocese of Ossory down in County Kilkenny, Church of Ireland Diocese, called the Red Book of Ossory, and it was put together in the 14th and 15th centuries. There's a document in that book going back to the 7th century, and it contains a recipe for a distilled spirit, and most of the ingredients would have come from the Middle East, so it would have been an incredibly expensive spirit to be making, and the only people who could have made it would have been the aristocrats who would have had the money, or the monasteries who also would have had a lot of money gathered over the centuries. And that then brings you to a stage where all the knowledge of distillation in Ireland was really kept in the clergy. But then along comes Henry VIII, and in 1536, as I'm sure you remember, 1536 to 1541, Henry VIII fell out with the powers that be in Rome and dissolved the monasteries and captured their wealth. So what happened in Ireland from about 1541 onwards is that all the monks were kicked out on the road. The only way they could make a living, a lot of them, was to actually sell their distillation services. So in a generation, the knowledge of distillation passed from clergy to laity, and distillation as a method of producing something that was pleasant and something that was commercially worthwhile became endemic in Irish society from that point on.
And something that was potent as well.
Very potent, yeah.
Wow, and the tradition of distilling as well. We're sitting in Granite Exchange here in the heart of Newry. You know, we're very close to the beautiful Mourne Mountains here, but there's a massive history of distilling in this area, and it's really had something of a revival. You're part of that.
Yes. One of my grandfathers was born a long time ago, shortly after the famine. And he died in 1923, so obviously I'd never met him. But when I was a child back in the 60s, I used to hear stories of a time long gone, and used to hear stories about distillers and poteen makers. And they're really stories of lore now. I thought they had sort of passed into my memory, but when this opportunity started to take shape, it brought things back to me that I remembered hearing decades ago, and it was part of the motivation to actually make this project live.
This podcast is sponsored by Granite Legal Services, a niche business and immigration law practice located in the heart of Newry City. Granite Legal Services provides legal advice to both individuals and companies alike across a wide range of industries, from employment, commercial or corporate law matters to immigration law. Granite Legal Services focuses on providing legally sound, practical advice to its clients. To get in touch, visit www.granitelegalservices.co.uk or contact 028 3026 2200. So let's talk about the project going live. Let's talk about the moment that you decided, I'm going to give this a go. I am leaving the bar, I'm leaving the courtroom, I'm leaving that behind me, and I'm going to go into that. Or was there an overlap?
Oh, there's definitely an overlap, yeah. The main boots on the ground for a long time would have been Noel Mills, who's now kicking his heels up because he's retired. He's hit 70 now. And Donal Jr., Donal Og,
Your son.
who would sort of be, he's in the distillery at the moment working away, and he would be the boots on the ground. We have other staff now as well that have come in, so the initial efforts that I put in have really sort of taken shape and been rewarded. I tend to take a back seat now for different reasons, so the mantle is almost passed, the torch is practically passed from me to the next generation, even at this stage.
And tell me about Mourne Dew then, for those of us who don't know. I'm not a whiskey drinker, I'm not a gin drinker, but you have lots of lovely delights on offer, lots of products. Talk us through them.
Well, our gins, which were our first products, are made by vacuum distillation. So they're very fresh flavoured, very easy to drink. They are fundamentally different from a lot of gins in the market in that we try to make ours gins with as much oil in them as possible. The oil is not visible to the eye unless you put it in a freezer and it goes cloudy. You see the oil precipitating out of the ethanol. The purpose of the oil, it's very, very light oil, it's a type of ester, is to make it smooth on the tongue, on the palate. It's what distillers and blenders would refer to as organoleptic properties. So when you put something in your mouth and it, as well as tasting nice, it feels nice.
Oh,
it's got mouthfeel.
Right.
Yeah. So let's say you put one of the well-known brands of gin in your mouth and
Yes.
it tastes quite severe and astringent, and you really don't want it on its own. You want it with a mixer. You'd try one of our gins, even though it's significantly stronger. You'll drink it and you say, yeah, actually, that's actually very smooth. That's easy to drink.
So would you say you don't need a mixer with yours?
We would say you don't need a mixer. You can drink it quite easily on its own or over rocks, over ice, and that's intentional. The inspiration for that was from reading about George Clooney, the actor. Some years ago, he was involved in a tequila distillery, and they focused on making a tequila with these same sort of properties, where instead of having to knock it back quickly, you could sip it slowly and savour it. And I thought, well, there's no reason we can't do that with our gin, and the properties of the distillation process allow us to do that.
So it sounds to me like you're somebody who, if you're going to do something, you're doing it right. And there's an awful lot of research and science that has gone into getting this product right. And, you know, you are a master distiller and a blender, but...
Well, you're actually being very kind by calling me a master distiller.
Are you not?
I'm self-taught in the in the distillery end of it.
Well, it sounds like you know what you're talking about, so you've impressed me. But, you know, how do you do all of the research? How do you get it just right? How do you make sure that what you're telling me, what you're telling your customers is absolutely gospel?
Well, you have to research, you have to read, you have to know what you're reading. In terms of developing the products, we went through a lengthy trial and error phase. There was really a stage where I didn't know what I was doing, but I soon found out when I did something that was wrong, I'll not do that again. So you build up a corpus of knowledge from that. In our case, we built up a library of flavours from a whole range of botanicals that are just that, a library for us. So we have them sitting on shelves. We have different types of flavours. One that's really, really interesting is nettle. We've made a beautiful nettle alcohol.
Gosh.
And when you drink it, it's almost like a nettle sting on the tongue. I know that sounds unpleasant, but it's actually warm and tickly, and you get this mild endorphin kick after the nettle passes away in about 2 seconds. And we've tried it on people who are visiting the distillery, and everybody loves it. They say, yeah, when are we going to get that out? I said, well, we just haven't got around to it yet.
Oh, what are you going to call that one?
No idea. Something to do with nettles.
That's fascinating too. Honestly, this is so interesting, and I just wish we had a little tasting.
Yeah.
You could pass those over to me, and I could just get stung on the tongue and all of that.
So, I knew I forgot to bring something with me.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, you're not allowed in the studio without something nice for me to try. But the Kilbrony and the Rostrevor, very popular products that you have on the shelves. Would they be your best sellers?
To date, yes, they have been our best sellers. But our other products are catching up. We're starting to export our whiskies, and our whiskies are going abroad. We have big hopes for export markets for those, more so than our gins.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the making of whiskey. Obviously, it takes a while till you can start producing your own, or you start blending, do you, first of all, and then are you distilling your own?
No, at the moment we get the new make spirit made for us. We then take it and cask it, and we cask it in a range of different types of cask. Mm-hmm. So we would use bourbon casks, we would use virgin oak casks, we would use rye casks, and we would have different types of spirit. We would have what they call grain spirit, which is made from unmalted barley and some from wheat. We would have malted barley and spirit, and we would have peated malted barley, which is a smoky flavour. And those different blends that those different individual whiskies that we have, we blend them to get the finished product that goes into the bottle. So in our two whiskies, we have another whisky coming out later this year. In our two whiskies to date, the blends are actually quite specific. One we have blended to try and suit the widest range of palate. So in other words, if you were a whiskey beginner, I am. That whiskey is the sort of whiskey that you would probably like, because it's not offensive in any way. There's no sort of niche flavours that you would think, oh no, I'm not ready for that. Mm-hmm. The second whiskey, which is a single malt, is blended purely and only to my taste. So I've taken all the flavours that I like in a whiskey, right, and that's the single malt. I've noticed that younger whiskey drinkers aren't dying about it, but older people are very partial to it. The flavours that you get in a whiskey, you'll get sort of fruity flavours, so they'll be redolent of oranges and raisins and apples and that type of fruit. You'll get floral, like hay or a smell of a greenhouse, so you might get that off a whiskey. The peaty, in the case of peaty whiskies, it's a smoky, almost medicinal flavour, which is definitely an acquired taste. And then, of course, you get sort of vanilla flavours and honey and caramel. A very important molecule in whiskey is a molecule called guaiacol. And guaiacol is probably the closest flavour to a whiskey flavour. Right. So guaiacol is actually at its optimum when the concentration of alcohol to water is 27%, and which explains why people like whiskey with a splash of water in it or with a cube of ice, because it dilutes the whiskey and it actually increases the flavour as opposed to diluting the flavour. So that's the whiskey end of it. It's a fascinating subject.
And whiskey's become so popular again, hasn't it? I mean, it's quite a crowded market. And I mean, you're an Irish whiskey now. You're up against a lot of big names there in terms of export markets, etc. How do you feel you do in competing with some of the more well-known names?
We are trying to link up with distributors worldwide who are appropriate to our size. So in other words, we don't look for a giant distributor to take our product and put it somewhere in a storeroom. We're looking for sort of small to medium-sized distributors worldwide who will invest in our product and will run with it from the start. So we're starting to sell in Vietnam. We're starting to sell in America. We're selling in the European Union at the moment. We sell quite a bit to France, to Spain, starting to sell to Germany. We've set up a depot in London, so we're starting to penetrate into the southeast.
And when you're selling a product, or whether, especially I think in the food and drink market, it's so important to see, feel the places that, you know, the customers, I suppose, you'd see them. It's all part of the social media message. Have you been to Vietnam? Have you been to these places? Do you see what the reaction is from the people sampling your delights?
Zoom is a great tool.
Yes.
So we've had sort of extensive Zoom meetings in the last 2 pandemic years. In the ordinary course of events, yes, we would have been out there, but it wasn't possible.
Would you like to get out there? Would you like to go to Vietnam? And
absolutely.
Imagine.
Go to Vietnam and get drunk, yeah.
And actually sit there and say, here I am with my Mourne Dew, and I started it right back in Rostrevor, in Kilbrony in Rostrevor, and you know, here it's now in Vietnam. That must make you really proud.
Yeah, I never get the chance to think about that, to be quite honest. It's more something to be done. It's just become part of my life to the extent that I'm almost thinking about it 24/7.
Right, and you did say you've sort of stepped back from the day-to-day.
I've stepped back from it, but I still can't stop thinking about it.
It's quite intense, and I can see that. It is all-consuming, and you strike me as someone who has to absolutely get it right if you're doing this. Did Donal always want to get into the family business?
Well, Donal actually trained in housing management and was working in a housing association in Liverpool some years ago. And when I suggested this to him, he was quite keen on it. So he bought into it big time. He does enjoy it.
And what's it like working father-son?
We're always arguing.
Are you? Did you always argue
anyway?
Yeah,
I think we're that used to arguing that we don't get bothered about it. You know, arguing's probably not the right word. We do disagree, but it's only disagreeing in a constructive way.
Yeah. And is it constructive? Are you different people? Are you very similar?
Yeah, he's more hands-on than me. I'm probably more academic than he is. So
he's a grafter.
Yeah, he's a grafter.
And do you need that?
You absolutely need it. It's like the old saying, a bird never flew on one wing. You know, you can't have only one type of person in a business.
So what would he be doing now? What is a normal day then at Mourne Dew? We
are getting a couple of pallets of drink ready to be shipped out to England at the moment. So that came in at sort of fairly short notice, that order. So that's what he's getting sorted out this afternoon. So it sounds like you still pretty much know what's going on in there. Yeah. You have to. You can't sleep at night. I think you're being very modest here, because it is a huge success story, and it is a family business, and I suppose Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland has a real history too of family business. Is it something that you see even a next generation taking on? I can see about 15 years down the road. I can't see beyond that. I've no idea what will happen. I can see that in 15 years' time, we'll have a range of aged products, aged whiskies that will certainly become upmarket in nature. Our whiskies at the moment are 3 years old, which is the minimum for whisky. Mm-hmm. There's no particular reason for that 3-year limit, except that in the First World War, Lloyd George, who was very, very anti-drink, he was an abstinence campaigner, he brought in legislation to ensure that whisky had to be 3 years old. And the effect of that was to shut down a lot of small distilleries, which couldn't handle the finances involved in storing your liquid for 3 years as opposed to storing it for a year and getting it out on the shelves. So he was quite effective in that whisky production was restricted, and the availability of whiskey for people to drink was restricted. So we're still stuck with it. It is what it is. It's not 3 years in every part of the world. Bourbon is 2 years.
Right.
There may be also climactic reasons for that, in that a bourbon warehouse sitting in the southern states in America is much warmer than a warehouse in Ireland or in the north of Scotland.
You betcha.
And the reactions run quicker to mature the spirit, but it still is what it is. It's 3 years, and people attribute value to the age of the spirit. I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that analysis, but that's the way it is.
I want to know
as our spirits get older, they will get more valuable.
Okay, and you've also got some new product development underway, even though you're not there day to day. You're quite excited about, I'm quite excited to read about this Navy Strength Gin.
Yeah.
Tell me about Navy Strength Gin.
Navy Strength Gin dates back to the days of wooden boats. And in the wooden boats in the different navies around Europe, should it be the French Navy, the Royal Navy, Portuguese Navy, space was very limited. And they invariably ended up storing their spirits, their alcohol for drinking, right next door to their gunpowder. The problem was that if the gunpowder got wet from the alcohol, it became useless unless the alcohol was over 57% alcohol by volume. And that meant that any alcohol that brought on board, should it be rum, should it be gin, whatever, was always over 57%. So
were they in any fit state to use the gunpowder after having that?
Yeah, well, see that there was an admiral, and I'm trying to think of his name. They called him Old Grog, and he brought in this rule that the spirit had to be cut with water before the sailors drank it, and that name his name became the origin of grog as a type of drink. Right. So grog is a watered down spirit.
But you're bringing out a Navy Strength Gin.
We're bringing a Navy Strength Gin, which certainly has to be treated with respect.
I was going to say,
and it's very robust, but it's easily capable of being drunk neat if you really want to go down that road. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't advise you to drink too much of it. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted. We do a lot of research on our poachings. And we've carried out work with Queen's University on accelerated maturation techniques for poaching. We have a superb drink. It's probably the drink that I'm proudest of. It is a hazelnut poaching liqueur.
Oh, lovely. Sounds delicious.
There is nothing like it in any market that I've ever found. The closest would be Frangelico, the Italian liqueur. And to me, well, again, I'm biased, but it's a pale, watery imitation of our drink.
Wow.
So our drink has all the richness of whiskey and poaching, and it's got the very, very strong hazelnut flavour from the hazelnut poaching that we make. And we do that with vacuum distillation. When you do it with conventional distillation, the hazelnut is really oily. So the oil comes over in the distillation, and you end up with this glary mess in your distillate.
That's not good oil.
No, it's impossible. It's unusable.
Right.
When we make it, we're distilling at such low temperatures that the oil stays behind and stays in the residue, and we get a clean hazelnut distillate over which is then blended into our other poachings to make the final product.
I love the sound of that.
It's really, really good.
Your poaching brand is called the Pukka. What is the Pukka?
Well, the Pukka is a famous character from Irish fairy lore, and the story goes that the Pukka was actually an angel, or the Pukkas were angels at the time of the fall. And some angels sided with God and some angels sided with the devil. And the Pukka didn't side with either because he didn't know what way it was going to go. So as a punishment for his neutrality, he was cast out, but he wasn't cast out to hell, he was cast out to the world. And he appeared from that time in Ireland. The story of the Pukka is actually a story not unique to Ireland. It actually has similar versions down the Atlantic seaboard. So Scandinavian countries had their version of the Pukka. Scotland had its Pukka, right down to the Iberian Peninsula. There were stories, they're the same type of story. So obviously the story of the Pukka sort of spread and became endemic in those different cultures. But the idea about the Pukka was that he was there were bad Pukkas and good Pukkas. In old Irish cottages, there was a seat put on the right side of the cottage door, and there was thorn bush growing on the left. And that was for the good Pukka and the bad Pukka. The bad Pukka would go to the left side, and he wouldn't be welcome, and the good Pukka would be welcome to the seat on the right side of the cottage door. So when we were looking for a name for our brand, I came across another story about the Pukka. Now, the Pukka is a shape changer. So in different parts of Ireland, he appears as different things. He appears as human, and then he appears as an animal. The two animals that he normally appears as is as a hare or a horse. And there is a tradition called the Pukka's Wild Ride. And the Pukka's Wild Ride would happen when the Pukka, the poaching drinker was going to the poaching maker or to the pub in the 16th century, whatever it was, and he would have maybe just a little more than he should have had, and he would be coming home fairly well intoxicated, and the Pukka would grab him, throw him up on his back, take him on this wild journey as a horse, and then leave the victim back where he started, completely dishevelled and clueless as to what had happened. And this is a true story. This is a true story. So the Pukka, he was. If you meet a good Pukka, he'll do you a good turn. If you meet a bad Pukka, he'll do something nasty.
Beware the bad Pukka.
Yeah, beware the bad Pukka. In most of Ireland, around Samhain, around Halloween, shares were left for the Pukka. So that you would get good luck for the rest of the year from the Pukka. So there was just so much history and so much lore in that character of the Pukka. And when we came across the story of the Pukka's Wild Ride, we thought we just have to call our poaching spirit Pukka.
What else? What a brilliant. You must have just gone, that's it, Eureka, we've got it.
That was one of those Eureka moments where you said, there's no other name that we can call this spirit except Pukka.
Love it.
There's a bar in London now, in Wimbledon direction. They sell our products, and they actually have made a cocktail which is quite brilliant, and it's called the Wild Ride because they read my notes on the subject, and they said, we're going to use that as well.
Make that
apparently, it's one of their best selling.
Be a great name for a pub as well. Yeah. The Pukka. There we go. You've heard it here. Copyright that.
I have. We got reviewed on the Matt Cooper show on Today FM. They described it recently. It's Christmas in a bottle.
I was going to say, it just sounds like it might be replacing the other very well-known drink that a lot of people drink at Christmas. It sounds perfect for that. You talked there about innovation. You talked about working closely with Queen's, and I know there are wonderful scientists here very much involved in helping companies like you develop, innovate, get the next big thing and test, I suppose, their product first of all in a safe way and make sure all of the claims that you're making actually, live up to what you're saying. How have Queen's helped you? What's that relationship like? How does that work?
Queen's are really good. They're really, really helpful. They've run several projects for us with the help of Invest NI. So one project was on research and accelerated maturation techniques. In a whiskey cask, there are 7 reactions occurring. There's the reaction between the liquid and the wood. So the chemicals come out of the wood, the oak barrel, and start reacting with the ethanol. There's the reaction between the alcohol and the other products of fermentation, which produce a range of chemicals, but they produce them very slowly, hence the prolonged distillation period. Now, we can't accelerate the production of whiskey because 3 years is 3 years. Nothing's going to change 3 years. Poaching can be in wood for 10 weeks, But if we have found that if we store it under very, very specific conditions, we accelerate the maturation in the barrel in 10 weeks.
Wow.
And what we produce is a poaching, which is not what people would conventionally have experienced as poaching, if they ever experienced poaching, which is pretty rough. Ours is like a light whiskey, and it has a different sort of flavour set entirely. For instance, one of the chemicals is actually quite interesting. One of the chemicals that's produced as a byproduct of fermentation is butyric acid. Butyric acid is actually quite popular in American food. It's in Hershey's chocolate, and Hershey chocolate to most of us here in this side of the Atlantic is pretty disgusting, and there's a reason for that. Butyric acid smells and tastes like vomit. It's actually what gives vomit its particular smell and taste. Yeah.
What the heck's it doing in Hershey's?
Yeah, but because they're just used to it,
Yeah.
and I think Americans seem to like it when they grow up with it, and they don't like our European chocolate.
They're mad.
But butyric acid reacts with ethanol to make ethyl butyrate, and ethyl butyrate tastes and smells like pineapple. So it goes from disgusting to delicious over a period of years. In our poachings, we drive that reaction as fast as we possibly can and get it complete in weeks rather than years. And hence our poaching is not poaching as people know it. People have actually been disappointed with our poaching because it hasn't been that rough spirit that they were expecting, that it was something else entirely.
You're absolutely blowing my mind here, Donal, and I hope you don't give me a test afterwards on all of the things that I'm trying to learn and trying to remember and trying to take on. It's a fascinating insight into your world, into your brain, out of which all of these amazing inventions and ideas come from. And I wish you every success with the future of Mourne Dew and indeed of the family business. And I do hope you get to step back a little too. The purpose of this podcast is to give advice to people who may have a business idea out there, have no idea where to begin, they're unsure whether it's a risk worth taking. What would you say your advice would be, and also if you could give us an insight into the biggest challenge perhaps that you've had to overcome in running your own business?
Biggest challenge, well, two questions there. I'll answer the biggest question. Yeah, the biggest challenge, the hardest lesson that you can learn in business is that there are good and bad people out there in the business world. I'm not talking about employees now. All employees need to be good, but the whole circle of acquaintances and contacts that you will develop in business, there are good and bad people. Good people will help you on the road to success, and bad people can ruin everything for you.
And how do you know the difference?
You don't. It's very hard to know at first instance. It's very hard to tell who's good and who's bad. But the thing is, when the penny drops and you realise somebody's not good for your business, you have to bite the bullet and cut your ties. And we've come across that in our distillery business. And
you learn the hard way.
You learn the hard way. Get rid of the bad people and cultivate the good relationships.
Right, brilliant. And what about taking the risk in the first place? Are you glad you did it?
So far, yeah. So far. It's a work in progress, but so far. I mean, anybody else thinking of starting a business?
Yeah. And maybe any other people who want to pursue a career in distilling?
Well, if you want to do a career in distilling, don't do what I did. Don't go and do accountancy or law. Go and do distilling and brewing. The Carlow Institute of Technology is one option. They run degrees in brewing and distilling. And the other one, the big one, because of the Scottish industry, Scottish distilling industry, is Harriet Watt in
Edinburgh.
In Edinburgh, yeah. They run courses, they run degrees and postgrads in distilling and brewing. And I would say that anybody who is interested should go to one of those two places. And I would have thought they would have been pretty certain to get a job, because craft brewing and craft distillation is here to stay. It's not going to go away. Might not necessarily be Mourne Dew, but there will be somebody there in the future sort of looking for craft distillers and for that expertise.
A good profession, a good career to go into.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's been, honestly, it's been a lesson. It's been an education talking to you today, Donal Farrell.
Every day is a school day.
Oh, I tell you, but that was a really tough, and science was never really my thing. But I've learned an awful lot, especially the history of these wonderful drinks that we see. And yes, looking forward to seeing the Navy Strength Gin and that hazelnut liqueur.
The hazelnut liqueur is gorgeous.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely gorgeous.
That's where I'm heading. Thank you so much. And everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Public Eye podcast. We'll be back with more very soon. This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service, where our team using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.